I can't even begin to feel comfortable doing this. Bear with me for a few minutes here. I'm going to be entertaining some disrespectful notions, and I might just end up fanning this bizarre fire of paranoia that has outcasted the geriatric perception of my hobby as violent perversion for decades. But I was getting a lot of personal requests to make a video about the stupidest topic going through the news these days, so here goes! The NRA, gun violence, and video games. Yay. Note that this isn't going to be a discussion about the Newton, Connecticut shootings or how that event relates to video games. The cynical Brit did a fantastic job of writing about that, and if you want a really powerful, well-researched and backed-up script all about how you can't say that video games cause violence, then I encourage you click the annotation above and check it out. That being said, this is a video about the NRA press conference that blamed video game violence for the real-life violence behind the shootings in Connecticut. This press conference happened about 11 days ago, and to sum it up, what we had was Wayne LaPierre, the vice president of the National Rifle Association, hate on video games, action movies, and Obama's budget plans for infringing on his own violent escapist fantasy plan for the nation. Oh, and yeah, there are a couple other idiots getting in the way of this idiot.
And here's another dirty little truth that the media try their best to conceal. There exists in this country, sadly, a callous, corrupt, and corrupting shadow industry that sells and stows violence against its own people through vicious, violent video games.
Actually, Wayne, the video game industry operates pretty damn openly, with some of the biggest corporations in America being publicly traded to market to the lowest common denominators. And the dirty little truth moniker seems a little conceited too. If this exchange between a university researcher and a broadcast journalist is evidence enough, then there are plenty of news people out there who are foaming at the mouth for a chance for an accredited researcher to say that yes, video games cause violence. Too bad that never happens. In fact, many publications have been doing exactly what the NRA says they haven't been doing and have been publishing big, bold headlines celebrating discoveries of the killer's favorite video games and free time hobbies. It's weird that some of the most offensive attempts at turning this tragedy into hero worship come video game condemnation is coming from UK tabloids who are thousands of miles away from their source. The Daily Mail published a feature with a supposed interview by the killer's plumber of all people who claimed that he was obsessed with guns and games. The Sun detailed a dark basement layer plastered with posters of military hardware. The Daily Express revealed that he really liked Dynasty Warriors.
Feel the power of my magic!
Yeah, it's kind of weird and actually really scary how a lot of this stuff is so similar to celebrity gossip.
And here's one. It's called Kindergarten Killers. It's been online for 10 years. How come my research staff can find it and all of yours couldn't?
Because no one cares! That's a decade-old Flash game made and released for free by an 18-year-old with a bad sense of shock humor in his free time. These kinds of games are a dime a dozen on the Flash portal, and this particular one wasn't even quality enough for Newgrounds standards. They aren't commodities being marketed to anyone, and no one's talking about it because no one's played it. And then he goes on and says that when the media reports on his embarrassing topics, they just don't know what they're talking about.
They don't know what they're talking about.
But the real bomb gets dropped about 14 minutes into this speech.
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
That quote right there is unrealistic, paranoid, violent, dehumanizing, delusional, and hypocritical enough to invalidate almost everything this man has said previously. And you can tell how convinced he is because he's actually just paraphrasing the previous sentence.
The only way to stop a monster from killing our kids is to be personally involved and invested in a plan of absolute protection. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Isn't this the kind of fantastical, violent escapism that defines the video games he hates so much? I mean, seriously, you got a good guy with the gun who stops the bad guy with the gun, and that's the only solution. And that happens all the time in entertainment, but in real life it's usually not that simple. Do you know how patronizing it is just to even say that? Does this guy honestly believe this stuff? He can't. I'm calling it. This is all political bullshit. There's no way a grown-ass man, well into his 60s, can have such a cartoony, childish, and idealistic worldview. Look at this. You have this old white guy telling everyone to believe in good versus
evil monsters,
so that he can thinly justify an imaginary need for guns to be everywhere. But the thing is, the people behind these spree shootings are the same kind of human being as you and me, and that's what fucks it all up. That's why people care so much about what a sociopathic killer's favorite video game was or what their house and living situation was like. The people who actually tune into this news coverage or buy these tabloids turn killers into celebrities. What fucks it all up is that these reports turn homicide into an accomplishment. And after all these spree killings, you see other killers pop up and follow the example. Because that's exactly what happened after Newtown. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So what's his plan for curbing all this violence?
As soon as our kids return to school after the holiday break, we need to have every single school in America immediately deploy a protection program proven to work. And by that, I mean armed security.
So I guess he forgot that the armed guards at Columbine and the entire SWAT team at Virginia Tech wasn't enough to stop that violence. And I suppose he's also forgetting the administrative costs of hiring, training, and equipping armed security guards for schools that have a hard enough time paying teachers. I mean, it's not like this speech was backed up by evidence anyway. He goes on for 30 minutes without citing any kind of statistics, studies, or even theories that back up his claims. It's a half hour of unrealistic and unwarranted old man pipe dream that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. If it was a high school research paper, it would get a C-. Talks like these are a dime a dozen in American politics, and if he didn't make it relate to video games, it wouldn't have ended up here. But the thing that makes this speech, and the good guy with the gun quote in particular, so repugnant, is that it shows that the NRA, which is a hugely powerful political lobby that has a hand in how everyone's constitutional rights are interpreted, entirely back out of their discussion. And they're also completely dehumanizing and disrespectful when it comes to the issue of gun violence, which you'd think they'd want to be really freaking careful about talking about. And this is their official, stated response to an episode of gun violence. Out of so many other issues, including our lacking mental health care safety net and our economically competitive society that disproportionately disallows treatment for the most mentally unhealthy people, and the institutionalization and industrialization of a military-industrial complex that has us almost financially dependent on military supremacy, and the oppressive social environment and prison-like architecture of public schools, and the historical and cultural significance of gun violence throughout the entirety of American history, and the killer's family's lack of responsible and safe gun ownership practices, the NRA blamed video games. You know, I get it. Games look scary. Stuff like this is intimidating to watch, especially if you're not engaging in it. Most popular video games are not super violent M-rated gun porns, but the most popular video game is. That is one thing we are guilty of. This industry markets in violent imagery, and violence is almost ubiquitous to the medium, mostly because physical conflict has a hell of an efficient set of rules if you need to turn a spatial simulation to a game system. But games don't have a direct effects connection to violence, and this is something that's been proven by science. Crime as a whole has actually been decreasing over the past 2 decades as gaming became more popular, and the countries that produce some of the most violent games don't have any gun crime at all. But all those facts and studies have been cited countless times by people smarter than the NRA spokesperson and smarter than me. And I really don't want to be debating the cause of violence or the merit of gun control laws here. This isn't a political channel, this is supposed to be about games, and unfortunately this NRA speech is a game issue. Since then, this kid, who's too young to be playing Call of Duty, has asked a bunch of other kids to stop playing Call of Duty. There was this ceasefire day where people were supposed to stop playing online shooters for a day, and the media ended up manipulating that message and people just played their games as usual. It would have been an inept pursuit, like a bill presented to Congress 12 days ago that wants to fund yet another study that'll try to test a link between violence and video games, even though previous decades of work have not been able to find one. I can't help but feel like all these reactions just kind of miss the point, and that they don't really understand how they only end up furthering this bizarre incrimination of video games. But if anything else, what this press conference shows is that the NRA hates on video games for infringing on its own violent hero fantasy and binary morality. What's scary, though, is that that's actually their worldview and their political platform. And they have lots and lots of guns. Who are we supposed to be afraid of again?
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.